"Grandma, can you ask my stepdad to stop putting things in my juice?" My granddaughter's breath was warm against my ear, her small hand gripping my sleeve like a lifeline. The words hit me colder than any wind I'd ever walked through. 8 years old, whispering a secret she'd clearly been carrying alone for weeks. I had raised one daughter and buried one husband, and in 68 years, I had never felt fear move through me the way it did in that hallway. But I only smiled, kissed her forehead, and told her everything would be fine. Because it was about to be, on my terms, not theirs. My name doesn't matter yet. What matters is that I drove home that night with my hands steady on the wheel and my mind already 3 steps ahead. The way it had been 3 steps ahead of every person who ever underestimated me. I am not a woman who panics. I am a woman who plans. I am Eleanor Whitfield, 68 years old, a retired hospital administrator who spent 31 years signing off on budgets, staffing schedules, and more than anyone in that building ever knew, quietly learning to read the small signs that something in a chart didn't add up. I know what it looks like when a person is hiding something behind a smile. I learned it professionally, long before I ever needed to use it on my own family. My daughter, Claire, is 41. I raised her alone after her father, my husband, Thomas, died of a heart attack when she was 14. I worked double shifts. I sold the house. I loved to pay for her nursing degree, and I never once made her feel the weight of what it cost me. When she married her first husband, Daniel, I welcomed him like a son. When they had Sophie, I cried in the hospital hallway the way only a grandmother can cry. Pure, uncomplicated joy. When Daniel died in a car accident 4 years ago, I moved 2 streets away from Claire so I could help her survive the wreckage of her grief. I babysat. I cooked. I sat with her at 2 a.m. when the loneliness became too loud. 2 years ago, Claire married Richard Voss. I did not like him from the first handshake, and I have learned over 68 years to trust that particular chill in my chest. Richard was charming in the practiced way of a man who has learned exactly which sentences make people comfortable. He complimented my cooking. He remembered my birthday. He called me Mom within 3 months, which struck me as presumptuous rather than warm. But Claire was happy, or seemed to be, and Sophie needed a father figure, and I told myself that my discomfort was simply the selfishness of an old woman who didn't want to share her daughter. I was wrong to doubt myself. I would not make that mistake again. The pattern began small, the way these things always do. Sophie, who had been a bright, chattering child, grew quiet at family dinners. She started falling asleep at odd hours. At her cousin's birthday party, at the dinner table, once in the middle of a movie she had begged to watch. Claire laughed it off as growth spurts. Richard called her my little sleepyhead with a fondness that, in hindsight, I recognize now as performance. I noticed Sophie's grades slipping. I noticed she stopped asking to come stay with me on weekends, though she used to beg. I noticed, most of all, the way her eyes moved to Richard before she answered almost any question, as if checking for permission. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself grief does strange things to a family, that a stepfather adjusting to a new household might simply be firm, might simply have rules I didn't understand. I have spent my whole life being fair to people before I judge them. That fairness very nearly cost my granddaughter everything. It was Sophie's 9th birthday that broke it open. I drove over with a gift, a telescope, because she had told me in March she wanted to see Saturn's rings, and found the house unusually quiet for a birthday afternoon. Claire was in the kitchen, distracted, apologizing that the day hadn't gone as planned. Richard was in his office with the door shut. And Sophie, my sharp, funny, endlessly talkative granddaughter, sat curled on the porch, swing alone, staring at nothing. I sat beside her. I gave her the telescope. She managed a small smile, and then, when I leaned in to hug her, she pulled me close instead and whispered those words into my ear. "Can you ask my stepdad to stop putting things in my juice?" I did not gasp. I did not let my face change. 31 years in hospital administration teaches you how to receive terrible information without giving away that you've received it, because the moment you show fear, people stop talking. I asked her, very softly, very calmly, what she meant. She told me that some nights, when Richard made her special juice before bed, her mouth would go dry and her head would feel heavy and strange, like the world was moving underwater. She said it happened more on the nights her mother worked late shifts at the hospital. She said Richard told her it was vitamins and that she shouldn't tell her mom because it would hurt her feelings. Vitamins that made an 8-year-old's world tilt sideways. I told Sophie I believed her, and I meant it with my whole chest. I told her I needed to take her somewhere to make sure she was safe, and that no matter what happened, this was not her fault, and she had done exactly the right thing by telling me. Then I walked into that kitchen, told Claire I was taking Sophie for ice cream, and drove. Not to an ice cream shop, but to the emergency room of the hospital, where I had worked for 3 decades, where I still knew the head of pediatrics by his first name. Dr. Amir Hassan had been my colleague for 22 years before I retired. He met us in a private exam room within 10 minutes. No questions asked in front of Sophie, because he understood, the moment he saw my face, that I was not there for a scraped knee. I sat in the hallway while they ran the panel. I remember counting the ceiling tiles. I remember thinking about Thomas, my husband, and what he would have done in that hallway, and knowing exactly what he would have done because he was a quiet man who became a mountain when someone he loved was threatened. When Dr. Hassan came out, he did not sit down. That told me everything before he said a word. "Eleanor," he said, "there are elevated levels of a sedative antihistamine in her system. Not a poison. Not something that would kill her outright. But repeated, low-dose administration, likely over weeks, possibly months. In a child her size, at these levels, someone has been medicating her without medical reason. Consistently. I did not cry in that hallway. I want to be honest with you about that, because I think grief and rage sometimes wear the same quiet face. I felt something in me go very still and very cold, the way a lake freezes over, smooth on top, and underneath, something moving with enormous force. "Do I need to call someone?" Dr. Hassan asked me carefully. He meant the authorities. He meant Child Protective Services. He meant the machinery that, once started, cannot be stopped or controlled by a grandmother with a plan. "Give me 48 hours, I told him. "Document everything exactly as you found it. I will not let this go unreported. But I need to be the one who protects her mother, too. Claire does not know." And there is a difference between a mother who fails to see and a mother who chooses not to see. I need to find out which one my daughter is. Dr. Hassan had known me long enough to trust that request. He documented the labs, wrote a clear medical note, and told me I had until Monday morning before hospital policy required him to file the report himself, with or without me. That was my clock. 48 hours to understand what I was dealing with, and then justice would take its course, whether I was ready or not. I drove Sophie to my house that night and told Claire she'd asked to have a grandma sleepover, which was, thankfully, not unusual. I made her chicken soup. I let her fall asleep on my couch with cartoons playing low, and I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea going cold in my hands, and I began to think the way I used to think when a department was hemorrhaging money and nobody could tell me why. Somebody was feeding a child sedatives. There were only 2 explanations. Either Claire knew and was complicit, which I did not believe in my bones, not for 1 second, not about the daughter I raised, or Claire did not know, which meant Richard had built an entire architecture of secrecy around my grandchild, using her mother's exhausting work schedule as cover. I needed proof that would hold up to more than my own certainty. I needed proof that would hold up in a courtroom, because men like Richard do not confess. They deflect. They charm. They make you sound hysterical for even asking the question. I had watched him do it in miniature a dozen times at dinner. The gentle correction, that's not quite how I remember it, the way he made Claire doubt her own account of small disagreements. I recognized the shape of that pattern now for what it was, rehearsal. The next morning, I called the one person besides Dr. Hassan who I trusted with my whole life. My late husband's cousin, Marlene Ochoa, who had spent 30 years as a family law attorney before retiring to a lake house 2 hours north. Marlene had handled my own affairs after Thomas died. She picked up on the second ring, heard 11 words out of my mouth, and told me to come immediately. I sat in Marlene's kitchen and told her everything. The whisper on the porch, the lab results, the pattern of drowsiness Claire had explained away as growth spurts, the way Sophie's eyes checked Richard's face before she spoke. Marlene listened the way good lawyers listen, without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad in handwriting I remembered from 30 years of Christmas cards. "Eleanor," she said finally, "you have the beginning of a very strong case, and you have almost no time. If CPS or the police get to Richard before you have documentation locked down, he will have time to build a story. Men like this always have a story ready. We need 3 things before Monday. Medical evidence. You already have that. Amir will hold it. A witness statement from Sophie taken properly by someone trained, so it can't be dismissed as coached. And something that shows intent, that this wasn't one confused mistake, but a pattern. How do I get the 3rd thing? I asked her, without tipping him off? Marlene smiled the small, sharp smile I remembered from every difficult conversation of my adult life. You do exactly what you did for 31 years, Eleanor. You audit him, quietly, before he knows anyone is looking. That afternoon, I did something I am not proud of and would do again without hesitation. I went to Claire's house while she was at a hospital shift, and Richard was, conveniently, golfing. A habit I now recognized as the hours he counted on being unsupervised. I told the neighbor watching the house, a kind widow named Pat Delgado, who had known me for years, that I'd forgotten to grab something of Sophie's. Pat let me in without a second thought. I did not touch anything that wasn't mine to touch as a grandmother with a key. I looked, carefully, at what any concerned relative might reasonably look at. In the kitchen, tucked behind the vitamins on the highest shelf, the one only an adult could reach, I found a small, unmarked bottle of liquid antihistamine, adult strength, nearly empty, hidden behind a row of Claire's protein powders where she would never think to look. Beside it, tucked into an old recipe box, I found a folded piece of paper in Richard's handwriting. A rough schedule of Claire's hospital shifts for the past 2 months, with certain nights circled in red pen. The same nights, I would later confirm against Sophie's school attendance and nurse's office visits that she had come to school groggy enough to be sent to lie down. I photographed everything exactly where it sat. I put nothing back out of place. I left the house the way I found it, and I drove straight to Marlene's office with my phone full of evidence in my hands, for the first time in 2 days, finally trembling. "This is intent," Marlene said quietly, looking through the photos. "This is not an accident. This is planning." I want to tell you something about the days that followed, because I think it matters for anyone listening who has ever felt like the fool in their own family, the one being managed instead of loved. I did not scream at Richard. I did not confront him across a dinner table in a fit of righteous fury, satisfying as that might have felt in the moment. I have learned, across nearly 70 years of living, that the people who do the most damage to men like Richard are never the ones who lose their temper. They are the ones who stay calm long enough to watch everything unravel on its own. Marlene arranged for a trained forensic interviewer, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Priya Nair, who specialized in exactly this kind of conversation with children, to speak with Sophie in a private, comfortable setting, away from both Claire and Richard, framed to Sophie simply as someone Grandma trusts to talk about how you've been feeling. Sophie, God bless that brave, clever child, told Dr. Nair almost exactly what she'd told me on the porch swing, with details I hadn't even known. That Richard would tell her the juice was our secret, that he'd get quietly angry, never yelling, just cold and disappointed if she said she didn't want it. That coldness I recognized instantly. I had felt an echo of it myself, in small moments, over 2 years of dinners. I called Claire's supervisor, a woman I'd known socially for years, and without revealing details, asked what Claire's schedule looked like for the coming Monday. I needed her home. I needed everyone home, together, at once, before Richard had any reason to suspect the walls were closing in. And then I did the hardest thing of all. I waited. Waiting, for a woman like me, is not passive. It is its own kind of labor. I spent those days finishing Sophie's schoolwork with her at my kitchen table, feeding her, letting her laugh again in the safety of my house, watching color come back into a child's face that I hadn't realized had gone so pale until I saw it return. I spent those nights on the phone with Marlene, refining exactly what would happen when the truth finally came out into the light. Not as an explosion, but as a door opening calmly, deliberately, on my terms. Monday morning, I called Claire and asked her to come to my house after her shift, alone, no explanation given beyond, "It's about Sophie, and I need you to trust me." I asked her to bring Richard, too, separately, an hour later, telling him only that I wanted to discuss the birthday party that hadn't gone as planned. I wanted Claire to hear the truth first, without his voice shaping it in real time. Claire arrived at 4 in the afternoon, still in her scrubs, exhaustion carved into the lines around her eyes. I sat her down at my kitchen table, the same table where I had done her homework with her 30 years earlier, and I told her everything. The whisper on the porch, the hospital, the labs, Marlene, the bottle behind the protein powder, the schedule with the red circles matching her night shifts exactly. I watched my daughter's face go through every stage of grief in the space of 10 minutes. Disbelief first. That can't be right. He loves her. He calls her his little sleepyhead. And I let her say it, because denial is not stupidity. It is armor, and I understood why she needed it for those first few seconds. Then the slow, terrible dawning as the pieces she'd been explaining away, the growth spurts, the falling asleep at dinner, Sophie's quietness only on the nights Claire worked, arranged themselves into a shape she could no longer unsee. Then anger, real and volcanic, the kind I had never once seen from my careful, controlled daughter. And then, finally, the thing that broke my own composure for the first time in 4 days, she put her head down on my kitchen table and sobbed like the 14-year-old girl who'd lost her father and asked me again and again how she had missed it. You didn't miss it, I told her, holding her the way I held her the night Thomas died. He built it so you wouldn't see it. That is not the same as failing her. That is being lied to by someone who studies people for a living, the way I studied budgets for a living. You are not the villain in this story, Claire. You are her mother, and her mother is exactly who saved her, the moment you knew. Richard arrived at 5 o'clock, whistling as he came up my front walk, still believing this was a conversation about a birthday cake that had arrived late. I let him in. Claire sat at the table, her eyes red, but her spine straight. Marlene's number already saved in her phone. A police report already filed that morning at Marlene's insistence, the wheels of something much larger than my kitchen already turning. Richard, I said, and my voice did not shake, I'd like you to sit down. We have some things to discuss about Sophie's juice. I watched his face for the flicker I'd been waiting 2 years to see, and there it was. Not confusion, not the innocent bafflement of a falsely accused man, but the fast, cold recalculation of someone whose story has just been taken away from him before he could tell it first. He tried anyway. He said the word vitamins. He said Sophie exaggerates. He looked at Claire and said, gently, dangerously, "Sweetheart, you know how she gets when she's tired, reaching for the same old lever he'd been pulling for 2 years to make my daughter doubt her own eyes. It did not work. Not this time." "I have the lab results," I told him, and laid Dr. Hassan's report on the table between us. "I have the bottle from behind the protein powder, photographed exactly where you hid it. I have your schedule of Claire's shifts, with the nights circled in red, matching every single time Sophie came to school too groggy to sit up straight. I have a forensic interview with your stepdaughter describing exactly how you told her it was our secret. And I have a police report, filed this morning, and an attorney who has already spoken with them at length. I want you to understand something about that moment, because I think about it often. Richard did not break down and confess out of some sudden flood of conscience. Men like him rarely do. He grew smaller in front of us, the charm curdling into something thin and mean, and he said, quietly, almost to himself, "You were never going to let me have anything, were you?" As if 2 years of drugging a child was somehow my fault for watching too closely. "No," I told him. "I was never going to let you have her." Claire did not scream at him. She had already done her screaming, alone, at my table, before he arrived. Instead, she stood, walked to the front door, and opened it. "Get your things from the house by Friday," she said, in a voice I had not heard from her since she was a teenager standing up to a bully at her school. "My lawyer will be in touch. And if you ever come near my daughter again, I will make sure the last thing you see before they close the door is her face, safe, and knowing you failed." He left. It was, in the end, almost anticlimactic. The great villain of my grandchild's nightmares reduced to a man collecting his golf clubs from a garage while a police officer, called at Marlene's advice as a precaution, stood quietly on the porch to make sure nothing escalated. I would like to tell you the reckoning was simple after that, but families rarely are, even the ones healing. Richard's sister, whom I had met perhaps 4 times, called Claire in tears, insisting there had to be a misunderstanding, that her brother would never. The same disbelief I had felt myself before the evidence made disbelief impossible. She has not spoken to Claire since, and I imagine if she ever looks honestly at the man she grew up with, she will understand why we did not soften the truth for her comfort. Claire's ex-mother-in-law, Daniel's mother, from her first marriage, a woman named Ruth who had remained close to us through the years, drove 4 hours the moment she heard, arriving with a suitcase and no agenda except to sit with Sophie and remind her, gently, that there were still safe men in the world, men like her father had been. Ruth stayed 3 weeks. I have never been more grateful for anyone in my life. The investigation confirmed everything Marlene and Dr. Hassan and Sophie's own quiet courage had already told us. Richard was charged, and Marlene tells me the medical documentation, the physical evidence, and the forensic interview together built a case strong enough that his attorney is already discussing a plea rather than a trial, which means Sophie will very likely never have to testify in a courtroom against him. That, more than anything else, is the victory I care about. Not his punishment, though I will not pretend I don't want that too. Her peace. It has been 4 months now. Sophie sleeps through the night without waking disoriented. She laughs at dinner again, the real laugh, the one that used to fill up a whole room before it went quiet on us. She asked me last week if we could look through the telescope I gave her for her birthday, and we sat on my back porch until nearly midnight, finding Saturn's rings together, her small hand warm in mine, and I thought, this is what all of it was for. Not the reveal at my kitchen table. Not watching Richard's face collapse when the truth caught up to him. This. A little girl looking at the sky again, unafraid. Claire has changed too, in ways I did not expect. She left her hospital position for a role with better hours, closer to home, less exhausting, less exploitable by anyone looking for gaps to hide in. She started therapy, not because I pushed her, but because she told me one night that she needed to understand how she had missed it, not to punish herself, but so it could never happen again. I am prouder of that decision than almost anything I have watched her do. If you are listening to this and some small, quiet part of you recognized something in this story, a whisper you brushed aside, a pattern you explained away because the alternative felt too enormous to hold. I want to tell you what I have learned across 68 years of living, 31 years of reading the truth hidden inside other people's careful stories, and 4 months of watching my granddaughter. Learn to laugh again. Trust the whisper. Children rarely lie about the things that frighten them. They lie, if anything, in the other direction, minimizing, protecting the adults around them from their own fear. And trust the cold feeling in your own chest when someone charming asks you to doubt what you already know. That feeling is not paranoia. It is decades of instinct, trying to save someone you love. You do not have to be loud to be powerful. You do not have to scream to be believed. Some of the strongest women I have ever known, myself included, on my better days, have done their most important work in complete silence, gathering the truth one careful piece at a time until the moment they were ready to set it, whole and undeniable, on the table in front of the people who thought they'd never be caught. If this story stayed with you, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me, what would you have done in my place? And from where in the world are you listening? I read every message, and you mean more to me than you know. For more stories like this one, like this video, and subscribe. There is so much more waiting for you. With love and respect. Until next time.